Well, good evening, everyone. A little bit longer today, so I hope you stick with me, but a very interesting topic. I thought I'd share today my disqualification letter with you from the UCP. I think, in light of the resignation letter that was submitted by Peter Guthrie with respect to some of the things he was seeing in the procurement process that he didn't support and was addressing concerns. And the fact that he didn't seem to have anybody else within caucus and or the cabinet share those same concerns. I thought you might find this interesting. Everything has a time, and I think for me, as far as my disqualification letter, I think the time has come, especially in light of Ruby Dalla, who has been disqualified from the Liberal leadership. Now, as you all know, I'm the farthest thing from a Liberal supporter, but I do believe in everyone's right to be able to participate in their political process. And, for so many people, they seem to think that this is just a liberal thing, but it is definitely not just a liberal thing. This is one of the very bad policies that parties enact upon their members. It's even members in good standing. So, like Miss Dalla, like myself at the time when I ran for the UCP in Livingston McLeod, they're happy to take your money. They're happy that you are a member. Just keep contributing. But it seems like that's where they want it to end. They want to control everything else beyond that. So I thought today that I would just share my letter with you a little bit and we could talk about it because I think it's important. We, as grassroots, have no say in who we elect as our candidate. And therefore, is this truly a democratic process? No, it's not. Your choices are being limited and your choices are being made for you before you even get to make a choice. So it is very much an illusion of democracy. There is no real democracy in it. So this letter is dated November 7th, 2022. I've never really shared it with anybody. But I think it's time to share it because I think in order for us to make changes, we have problems federally. And I know running for the UCP in Livingston McLeod, I loved the people, loved the riding, and had tremendous support. We sold 900 memberships in 10 days. Everybody I met with, including some of the NDP individuals, business owners, the mayor down there, we all agreed that, we may not always agree on policies and particular, things that were going on, especially at that time around COVID. But they all looked at me and went, "Yeah, we can work with you," right? Because I was just going to be honest with them. I was just going to tell them the truth. I was going to be transparent about the workings of government. And I was just going to do what I was supposed to do and what I was being elected to do, and that was be their representative. So here is the letter. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit the letter that was sent back from the president of the CA at the time in response to my disqualification. Because you know what, there are really, really good people in the CAs, in the constituency associations at the local level, and there's some really great members. But the problem is the system. And that is Danielle Smith in this particular case had just as much to do with this as anybody else, and the UCP executive and the authority that they exercised, which I think just proves how undemocratic this process actually is, and how people like myself, who cannot be necessarily controlled by the party, scare the right out of them. It really does. If they cannot control you, they do not want you anywhere near government. And why? Because just like Peter Guthrie, we saw, is calling out some of his concerns. Nobody else shares his concerns because they're all aware of what's going on. And I'll tell you, I've said this many times. I have worked in aerospace and defense. I have worked in healthcare. I have worked in finance for the last 20 some years. And never in my life have I worked in a space that is as unethical, as corrupt, and as untruthful, dishonest as politics. And it seems like for those who want to get ahead in politics, either you play the game or you don't even get a chance to get involved. And I think these are some of the things that we need to fix. So sadly, I'm going to read the letter. Please share, share your comments. If you're an NDP supporter or Liberal supporter, I don't really care to hear your comments. Yeah, you're like, yeah, it's about time, rah, rah. But if you're conservative and or libertarian, the fact that a party would disqualify somebody for sharing a strong opinion, and one in particular who was willing to debate that. And as you'll see here, even from the letter that was written from the CA, not only did I debate my opinions and comments, but I was able to defend them very strongly in a very logical, methodical way. And, this is what I thought government was all about, is open debate, open discussion. That's how we get to truth, right? So here we go. Miss Wellwood, candidacy for the United Conservative Party. I write to advise you that the contestant vetting process is now complete. Independent research. There was nothing independent about this. It was all done internally by UCP representatives and appointed individuals. That is conducted on all nomination contestants in accordance with the party's stringent vetting standards, has prompted serious questions about your candidacy for the United Conservative Party. Now, keep in mind, I had already won the nomination at this point. I had 900 new memberships that we had signed up, so a lot of support. There were individuals who were willing to run in the riding. I think there was 5, 6 of them at the time. They all threw their support behind me. And the last straw was Roger Reid, who was the sitting MLA, who would not step aside for Danielle Smith to run in her own riding, but stepped aside. He would not take me on in the nomination process. So I was actually to be acclaimed. All that was left to do was for me to have my interview, and then I was basically the nominee. I would be the official candidate for Livingston MacLeod. So all of this had happened before my interview, before they decide to even share any of their concerns. And this is what I bring up with respect to the party's happy to take your money, happy for you to be a part of the membership as long as you're serving their needs. But heaven forbid, you say something that they don't agree with, you're not fit to be part of the leadership team. So the party has repeatedly indicated that it will take appropriate action to protect itself and our members from serious reputational harm. Now, the members here we're talking about, I was representing Livingston MacLeod, and as we will see in the letter from the CA president, I very well represented the concerns and the issues in alignment with my constituency. So not sure where this reputational harm was coming from, because there's an awful lot of UCP members who actually agree with me, and still to this day. The stakes for Albertans in the next election are extremely high, and we cannot risk a return of the NDP. So here we're getting into the meat of it. We cannot risk the return of the NDP. Well, I can assure you that Livingston MacLeod, there was no concern of losing that seat to the NDP as long as you had a strong conservative candidate there. So not sure why here they make this statement. I do know why, but we'll get into that in a moment. Following a referral from the executive director, the Party Candidate Selection Committee, which they refer to as PCSC, I'll just use the acronym in future, has now met to formally consider your candidacy and has rejected your application. Now, in light of all of this, you also need to understand and know that there were a handful of people on the executive board who did at least want to give me an opportunity to voice my concerns as to what they had brought forward in their evidence. They bought a book. The PCSC, the party candidate, Kyle was his name, bought a book of tweets and Facebook posts and everything that he thought that, oh, we'll get her on this, we'll get her on this. And this was all bought up in the interview process that I had with the Constituency Association, the CA, and they were quite happy with my answers. So again, the party had already made the decision to disqualify me before I had even had my interview. And there were members at the executive board of directors who chose to establish and set up a meeting with me so that they could hear my responses to many of these claims, accusations, statements that were made. And let it be known that it was made very clear, and it got canceled. I got a phone call after it was set up. It was supposed to be 3 o'clock that afternoon. It got canceled. And the comment that was made to me is Cynthia Moore has made it very clear that this is her board. And I will not have the opportunity to defend myself and my position. So there you go, right? Talk about elitist. Per section 5.5 of the Candidate Selection Rules and Procedures, the rules, the PCSC has the authority to reject an applicant or disqualify a nomination contestant on any grounds it sees fit. So it doesn't even need a reason. It's like, thankfully, they gave me reasons. Oh, I should be honored. But they can just cancel and disqualify anybody they see fit. So, so much for grassroots, right? When you've got a top-down organization here that can just do whatever it damn well pleases and hell with the rest of everybody else's thoughts and opinions. And members, obviously, you just need to know where you stand, and that's at the bottom of the totem pole. The PCSC is under no obligation to disclose their reasons for rejecting an applicant or disqualifying a nomination contestant, and members of the PCSC may arrive at their decision to reject an applicant for any number of reasons. Now, they keep talking about the provincial committee, but what they fail to mention in here is the CA, the local committee. They are the ones who are tasked with finding a nominee, somebody who they, within their community, fits within their values, their beliefs, and will represent them. And there's no mention made of them in here. This is all about the provincial committee and about the UCP party and about the board of directors and the executive director. So just where it lies at the top. Applicant for any number of reasons. So in spite of this, there are concerning Twitter posts you have made that I wish to bring to your attention and will describe them below. Okay, so here's the concern, Twitter posts. Very good. First, you have shared a significant number of tweets that support Russian propaganda regarding the war in Ukraine, particularly with respect to conspiracy theories. Oh, here we go. About the US-controlled Ukrainian biolabs, and that the war is not about Russia or Ukraine, but about a globalist agenda. So we all know there is a globalist agenda. It's called the World Economic Forum. It's called the United Nations. No one in their right mind is going to dispute that. Ukrainian biolabs, I do believe it was just Tulsi Gabbard who just came out on the Trump administration and spoke very eloquently and matter of fact about the number of biolabs that exist in Ukraine. The war is not about Russia or the Ukraine. If you want to talk about the Ukraine war, I was happy to do that. And I did in my meeting. And I do have an aerospace and defense background. I have been a part of the military for many, many years, worked directly for the military, the Department of National Defense, and then had my own aerospace and defense company. And we had worked with international military industrial complex companies, as well as local, as well as the U.S. Defense and the Department of National Defense on the Canadian side. So I don't make haphazard statements. And in this particular case, I was always very careful when I spoke about the Ukraine war, especially at that time, because I truly, honestly felt for the Ukrainian people. I just felt like they were being pawns, used as pawns in a proxy war, basically with NATO. And I felt at then and now that it was a war that never ever had to happen. I just thought that what a waste of life, what a waste of resources. And the Ukraine has been at the center of conflict for so many years with so many different countries. And, it was made very clear as well in the 1990s when the Warsaw Pact was ended and NATO had agreed not Russia was going to break up. The Soviet Union was now going to be broken up. And in order for Russia to feel like it had some sort of security as a sovereign nation, that NATO would not advance any further east. And that's what they did. They just continually advanced further and further east until such time that they ended on the doorstep, the very doorstep, a border country with Russia called Ukraine. And the Minsk agreement, when the Chancellor Merkel came out and said that, that was really to buy Ukraine time to prepare for war with Russia. I sat back and went, wow, you negotiated a peacetime agreement here, international, in bad faith. That's exactly what she said. She negotiated this agreement in bad faith. They had intentions. They knew what they were doing. This has always been the plan. And the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's just look at how the United States responded to Russia when they proposed putting missiles in Cuba, a border country just across the pond, right there, a little bit of water separating the two countries. And, they completely unacceptable to the United States. And here was Ukraine and NATO proposing to do the exact same thing to Russia. So I was really just pointing out obvious facts, actual facts. And this was their kind of response, conspiracy theory. It's like these aren't conspiracy theories. So you have also supported the Russian narrative that neo-Nazis support the Ukrainian government. Again, that's a fact. There are neo-Nazi organizations all throughout Ukraine. Our own government here in Chrystia Freeland has been known to hold a flag that is neo-Nazi. I'll let you go figure out which one. Claim that Vladimir Putin has used to justify Russian aggression into Ukraine and noted that the brainwashed cannot see past the programming. Well, there's a lot of people that are brainwashed and can't see past their programming. And I'd say here in Canada right now, there's a lot of that going on. I don't mean to be rude, but the reality is, things are not as they appear to be. And if you're not willing to do a bit of digging and a bit of research to kind of get to the truth of the matter, then you know what? You're really, in my opinion, not entitled to an opinion. You can share, your thoughts, your views, go ahead. But if it's not backed up by any evidence, by any facts, I don't care really how you feel about something. I want to know the facts. I want to know and understand from a place of logic. Use that big brain that God gave us. So that was all I was really doing, was pointing out the fact that Ukraine war should never have happened. That loss of life, the loss of land and property and resources just never had to be, and that there was an agenda here, and there indeed was. In 2014, again, the Maiden Revolution. The U.S. had financed that to the tune of $5 billion and actually overthrew an actually democratic government, elected, and they just had them overthrown. And it's not the first time that this goes on. I mean, this goes on time and time again. So the problems in Ukraine were created by the same people and politicians we are fighting against to regain freedom. Lastly, you said that we were told lies. Well, it's turning out now that we've been told an awful lot of lies, haven't we? COVID, Ukraine, lots and lots of lies going on here. And thank you to the Trump administration and his cabinet for now beginning to expose many of those lies and much of the corruption that's been going on for far too long. So that is, I've been enjoying watching the Trump administration, Doge, all these things that are really exposing the level of corruption and the depths to which it extends. Russia did not lie, but the US and EU did. Well, you know what? I don't think Russia here literally, and actually, I think it was Trump who just recently came out and said Russia was not to blame for this war. I think there is going to have to be some accountability here on the side of NATO and the US. And Biden, I think, played a big role in this, and it needs to be addressed in the right way. It is completely unacceptable. So it's unacceptable for me to have this opinion, and a disservice to the thousands of civilians who have been ruthlessly murdered by the Russian regime to spread false narratives and conspiracy theories about the Russian invasion of a sovereign nation. So how dare I have an opinion? How dare I? They talk about ruthlessly murdered by the Russian regime. I wasn't trying to point fingers at Russia or point fingers at Ukraine. I was trying to point fingers at the fact that Canada should be finding a peaceful resolution to this. We should be negotiating peace, not funding a war. Okay. Second, it is troubling that as recently as July 2022, you call for former Premier Jason Kenney, Minister Travis Taves, Minister Tyler Shandro, and MLA Jason Nixon to go to jail. Now, when I was doing my interview, Kyle, the PCSC, asked me, Nadine, you can't call for politicians to go to jail. And I said, why can't I call for politicians to go to jail? He says, well, you can't call for your opposition to go to jail. So I'm not calling for my opposition to go to jail. Here's what I'm calling for: accountability. And the reality is, just the day before, Pastor Tim Stevens, remember Pastor Tim Stevens, had spent 21 days in jail, away from his family, away from his young children, 21 days in jail, and he was fully acquitted for not having done anything wrong. Fully acquitted. So I looked around the room that day in my CA interview and I said, what do you think is a fair and just consequence for the politicians who put them there? So I was asking about accountability. And again, many of the constituents in my riding at the time, Livingston McLeod, totally agreed with me. They're like, how do we hold politicians accountable for the actions that they make, especially when they have serious consequences on the people of which those policies affect? Here was a man, a pastor, just doing what he's always done, doing what he's supposed to do. He was called by God to preach, and that's what he was doing. And he was arrested and put in jail and taken away from his young family for 21 days. You tell me what's just. You tell me what's fair. Maybe Shandro should have spent 21 days in jail. Maybe Jason Kenney should still spend 21 days in jail. I still stand by this. In October 2022, you tactically agreed that members of the World Economic Forum should be identified, isolated, and eliminated, and noted that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau should be arrested and sent to jail. Well, lots of people, I think, still agree with me on that. I don't think there's any love lost for Justin Trudeau, and time has only shown that the man is actually worse than could ever possibly have been foreseen. And if you are even considering about voting for Mark Carney, well, Mark Carney is higher up the elitist globalist echelon than Justin Trudeau and will do more damage to this country than Justin Trudeau ever could. He is far more sophisticated. You're right. He's far more intelligent and intellectual. I would argue he maybe even has a little bit more charisma than Justin Trudeau. He seems like he's qualified to do the job. But let me tell you, he is the one who has been whispering in the ear of the Liberal administration here in Canada. And so if you think that he's not a politician, he claims, oh, he's never been involved in politics. He has been advising the Liberal government since 2020. Anyway, I digress. So here, he's saying that the World Economic Forum should be identified, isolated, and eliminated. Our own premier has basically said the exact same thing. We need to root out any influence that the World Economic Forum has in this province. Now, obviously, we can't do that on the federal side because they're full of them. Chrystia Freeland is a director. There are global leaders all embedded throughout the Liberal caucus. And so she says here, or he says here, you indicated at your LCNC, so my local CA interview, that your opinion is that ministers should be held responsible for their actions. Yeah, exactly. In a democracy, I love this. Listen to this. In a democracy, accountability is maintained at the ballot box. So you, my friend, the voters and the citizens of this province only get to hold your politicians accountable one day, one vote, every 4 years. This is what your UCP board of directors believed was that you get 1 day, 1 vote every 4 years, and that is how you hold them accountable. I call bullshit on that. We should be able to hold our leadership, our MLAs accountable every day of every year, not 1 day every 4 years. In a free and a society and a democracy, it is unbecoming of a hopeful elected official and potential member of the governing caucus to call for those of you who oppose to go to prison. And again, we've just gone through that. I wasn't calling for people who I oppose to go to prison. I was calling for what I thought was criminal behavior, fair and just consequence, right? I can't slander somebody. I can't defame them. I can't, send somebody to jail and not expect myself to have consequences. I thought we had one rule of law that applied to everybody in this country. One rule of law in particular here in Alberta that applied to everybody equally. And that doesn't seem to be the case because politicians seem to be exempt from the very laws that they make. And I see that as a huge problem. This was part of the reason why I wanted to get involved in politics. I didn't get involved because I was going to make more money. I'm a chartered investment manager. If I want to make money, I would have stayed doing what I was doing. I was sacrificing an income. And I've sacrificed 6, 7 years of my time, my family's time, in order to do this. To bring attention to what I thought were truly issues. I want to make this world a better place for my daughter to grow up in, for your children to grow up in. I wasn't doing this for me. This had nothing to do with me. But I can see the corruption. And, Peter Guthrie, God bless you. I have to say, I feel for you. I really do. Because I can just imagine how hard it was for you to resign your position as a minister. Knowing that there's really nothing you can do because there is no support from people within this very broken and very corrupt system to help you fix the problems. And I think, one of the few qualified, well-informed, well-educated individuals who certainly could have done that and would have stood by your side. But of course, that is indeed exactly the opposite of what the UCP party wants. Third, while the party does not take issue with your past candidacy for the People's Party of Canada, it is troubling that you would disregard concerns about vote splitting. Now, I can explain vote splitting, especially here in this province, and particularly the ridings in which I ran. It's kind of hard to split a vote to cost a Conservative candidate a seat when typically, and he even points out here, continue to campaign against our federal colleagues in the Conservative Party of Canada. As you know, it is significant crossover in supporters, members, and donors between the UCP and our federal counterparts, dismissing the leader of the CPP. So he's saying typically they earn upwards of 70% of the vote in provincial rural ridings. That is exactly my point. It is really hard to split a vote when the Conservatives get 70% of the vote. Split that into, give yourself 1 point to win. So 36% wins the seat. So I was PPC, extremely conservative. And so let's say Blake Richards here in my riding when I ran Banff Airdrie got 35%. So I won the seat. Is that splitting the vote somehow? No, it's taking a seat away from the Conservatives, but it's giving it to another Conservative. There was no risk here of getting an NDP or a Liberal vote or losing that seat, which is Conservative, to a Liberal or an NDP. So I love this fear mongering that they continue to do and this silliness, argument of vote splitting. But here I also want to point out, against our federal colleagues in the Conservative Party of Canada. Now, Danielle Smith was very quick to call out the NDP as nothing here provincially, as nothing more than a mere chapter of the federal party. So counterparts, right? Colleagues. Isn't that exactly what they're saying here? That they have federal colleagues and federal counterparts, and that's the Conservative Party of Canada. How dare I choose to support for someone else? I thought, here we were supposed to have provincial elections and then federal elections, and I was free to vote my conscience on both, but apparently not. They have it in their mind that I only am supposed to support our Conservative Party of Canada, despite the fact that Maxime Bernier, I aligned much better with his policies and much better with his principles of freedom, fairness, respect, and responsibility. I challenge anybody to disagree with his policies. They are now adopted by Pierre Poilievre. He's the one running around, and now that it's safe to do so, and promoting these exact same policies. So they just didn't like the fact that I would add credibility, in my opinion, to the People's Party of Canada. Dismissing the leader of the CPC, Pierre Poilievre, as a follower who complies with lies and corruption, criticizing former Prime Minister Stephen Harper as laying the foundation and path for the mess we find ourselves in today. Well, Stephen Harper is partly responsible for the mess that we are in today. This is not just the Liberal government that has gotten us here. This is the Conservative Party of Canada that's helped contribute to what we are find today as the mess, especially when it comes to the United Nations Agenda 2021. You know, people are talking about smart cities. They're talking about DEI. They're talking about all these woke ideologies. And a lot of that is coming out of Agenda 2021. Net zero. What a nonsense kind of argument is that? And I've always been, you know what, just don't propagate the lie. Right? To me, net zero is a lie. I will still stand by that. Net zero is a lie. Carbon dioxide is plant food. It is what fuels the food that we very much eat and enjoy today. Without it, nothing lives on this planet. Okay. And in history, and we've got geosamples that very much show that we've had much higher levels of CO2 in our atmosphere. This is a agenda, in my opinion, and it is a false narrative, and I'm happy to call it out. Now, I'm also happy to listen. If you want to prove it otherwise, then hey, by all means, be my guest, right? Convince me otherwise. So, foundation and path for the mess we find ourselves in today, continue on, and condemning the federal Conservative Party as morally and intellectually corrupt. Well, I think they're all morally and intellectually corrupt, the UCP included. So there you go. I'll add to the list now that we're years past. And I don't think it's any better. And I think even Peter Guthrie's statement, his resignation, is basically just proving there's corruption in our own government here locally, provincially. I would even say municipally as well. Here in Cochrane, we saw it in Chestermere. That needs to be exposed and called out. And again, you're seeing it in the Trump administration. They're calling out. They're exposing the corruption. They're exposing the lies. They're exposing the cheat. That the government's been doing, the theft of the taxpayers' dollar, all of these things. And you think Canada's any better? Heck no. In fact, I might argue we might even be worse. Hide it better. We hide it better. Oh, Lord. Morally and intellectually is not on a path to building a conservative movement in Alberta. And it is disrespectful to the tens of thousands of conservative supporters and members across the province. Well, I wasn't about attacking the members. I was about attacking the policies and politics and politicians. And for anybody who knows me, again, I want to be principled. I will follow the rules as they are applied to everybody equally, but that's not exactly what happens today. So, to say that it is disrespectful, you know what? That's your opinion. I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for somebody who has a difference of opinion and is willing to, with a backbone, stand on principle and actually call out what she sees as corrupt or morally and intellectually corrupt anyway. And you know what? Again, not to the point where I'm willing to make a statement that's 100% firm and fast. If you can prove otherwise, by all means, do so. But I think we've very much proven firm and fast in many instances the problems that reside within all levels of government we're beginning to see. Lastly, you have regularly engaged in conversation about obvious conspiracy theories. I love this one. So Dustin, the executive director who've written this letter to me, is an expert, it appears. So here's some of his conspiracy theories that he had concerned with, such as the World Economic Forum controls the world's food supply, that 5G telecommunication technology is not safe and is killing people silently. Now, I've never said that. I might have retweeted something, but 5G telecommunication, again, I worked in aerospace and defense. I know some of the technology that's out there as far as bioweapons and energy weapons, and I can tell you some of them are extremely harmful to people. My father-in-law used to work with microwave towers. He died of brain cancer. And I'm sorry, but those things are always emitting, and there is a consequence and a cost to that. Cancer is not an uncommon thing for people in those trades. People who work around certain equipment and machinery, especially in healthcare, again, have higher levels of illness. And again, here you go. It's like, if you want to prove me otherwise, by all means. But these are not conspiracy theories. The World Economic Forum has infiltrated the Canadian government. I love that one. Infiltrated the Canadian government. We have CSIS now talking about the fact that the Chinese have infiltrated the Canadian government. And yet you have our, finance minister, previously, Chrystia Freeland, who was the director for the World Economic Forum. She sat on their board. So what's that if it's not infiltrated? Justin Trudeau, world global leader. There's many of them, and not just on the Liberal side. There are some on the Conservative side, more so on the Liberal, but in this Liberal government in particular, the WEF has its stamp all over it. There is no denying that fact. Then he goes on to talk about fluoride is a toxic substance with no scientific data supporting any benefit of fluoride in drinking water. I'm like, okay, I did an entire interview, and I'm going to address this. You go look it up, with Dr. Bob. And I am well informed on fluoride. Well informed. I would be happy to take on any doctor, any dentist, anything in any debate on fluoride, because I am that well researched in it. Even Dr. Bob was like amazed at how much information I knew. Why? Because I've taken the time years and years ago to look up fluoride. It is a toxic substance. It is a neurotoxin. It has extremely negative effects upon your health. And here we were going to Calgary, you are going to put it back into your drinking water. So you're going to medicate people, baby, adult, doesn't matter if you're 10 pounds or 200 pounds, and you're going to put this in people's water supplies. So how do you control the dosage? There's so many things wrong with this. So many things. But feel free to go back to my YouTube channel, Dr. Bob, look and listen to that interview. If you are not aware of the harms of fluoride, Dr. Bob and I have a great conversation and put a tremendous number of resources out there that you can look up for yourself. He says here that, and supported the label of pure blood for those who were not vaccinated against COVID-19. Well, you know what? I laugh at that because I have never, ever, ever called myself a pure blood. As a matter of fact, it was actually in my interview, Kyle walked in and said, "So you said you couldn't get on a plane not because you were Métis, but because you're unvaccinated." He says, "Can you prove that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've got a card right here in my purse. Would you like to see it?" Now, I think that's absolutely atrocious. And he was drawing attention to the fact that there was a meme that gone around that talked about how the unvaccinated basically withstood the pressures and stood their ground and said, "Look, this is my bodily autonomy. This is my private property, and I do not have to be forced to take a vaccine." And I think I went and just hit a like button on that. Wow. Congratulations to those of you who stood firm, stood your ground, and withstood the tremendous amount of pressure that was put upon you. And that, I think, regardless, deserves admiration and respect. So that was my point on that. But yeah, so they would rather, though, just label me as a pure blood, which I've never, ever, kind of hard to do when that's indeed not the case. This kind of obviously false discourse is inappropriate for elected representatives and members of the governing party. So they can't disprove anything I've said here. There's not one piece of evidence here or fact or information that disproves anything that I have stated. I'm just a conspiracy theorist, right? Easy for them to discredit me just by calling me a conspiracy theorist, but without any evidence or any fact. And look at how misinformed these people actually are. So again, the party has been very open about the need to protect our reputation from candidate eruptions that distract from the key issues affecting everyday Albertans and give the NDP opportunities to talk about anything but their failed policies and ideas. We've consistently said that we will take action to protect the party and our members. Now, here's the thing. So I was told part of the reason why I was disqualified was because I may upset the NDP and jeopardize some of the ridings in Edmonton. Well, I wasn't representing the residents, anybody in Edmonton, nowhere near Edmonton. And the people who I was representing or supposed to represent actually agreed with much, if not all, of these conspiracy theories and policies that I was bringing attention to. Now, I'm quickly just going to go through the letter here that the president sent back because, I do know there are some really fantastic people at the local level, especially the CA. I know so many of them working hard. Some of the MLAs, I know they're doing the best they can to bring attention. So not all people, are bad in government. Unfortunately, I think the system is broken and it needs to be changed. And I think part of that needs to start with the fact that we need to get rid of career politics. 2 terms, you're in, you're done, 2 terms, that's it. Do your public service. I think we need to pay our politicians more. Why? Because right now we have a bunch of people who get into politics. Why? Because they can't make it in the private sector or they're at least the public sector has more to offer them. And here's the reality. I'm going, if we paid them more to do the job and then held them accountable to that job, isn't that better than paying them lifelong pensions? Somebody who's not even qualified to run a business. You wouldn't hire Justin Trudeau to run your business, but you voted for him to run the entire country, the largest business in the world, right? And why? So, here was not that I want to toot my own horn, but a chartered investment manager, somebody who's worked in business for decades. I had skills, could critically think, could withstand pressure, to find the right solution forward, seek the truth. And none of that was welcome. It was like, oh my gosh, no, the NDP might use that against us. So heaven forbid. So anyway, back to this letter. As described in the UCP's own policy and governance documents, the president here does talk about the fact that he felt the UCP as a party no longer respects the authority of its local CA to make decisions. Now, what I found interesting on this was Danielle Smith, I thought when she got elected, especially because she was calling on the federal government to stay in its own lane so much. Do not step out of your lane. This is provincial jurisdiction. And here you have the CA's responsibility was to find a candidate and a nominee, somebody who would represent them, their values, their beliefs in parliament, in legislature. And guess what? They showed completely no respect for them. Absolutely zero. He talks here about Article 8, accountability and governance, and Article 9, committees, the constituency association, and the role that it's supposed to play. He also noted the lack of transparency and almost zero communication of the provincial selection committee and the UCP board with the local nomination, so the LNSC, surrounding the disqualification. You would think that they would have actually called them and said, hey, look, here's our concerns. What do you think? There was no consultation whatsoever. Kyle at the provincial had already made the decision that I was to be disqualified, except he didn't want to do it, which is why that night in my interview, he worked so hard to have the local CA do it for him. And they refused to do that. Why? Because I had rational, reasonable, was able to defend my position on my comments and suggestions that I had made. And they knew it. And they went, yeah, okay, this is fair enough. I even had one of the gentlemen ask me that night, what do you think? Are you cabinet material? And I said, hey, give me 18 months. I'll need 18 months to figure out the system. But yeah, I felt obviously that I could certainly was one of the more qualified candidates. And so we believe that the process selection nomination is currently undemocratic and does not serve the best interests of the members of this community. No kidding, because they just completely were disregarded and not even considered or consulted in the process. As we were not able to identify with policy, they couldn't even identify which policy within the UCP board that gave the provincial selection committee the authority to override. So they're asking for that here. But here's a couple of quotes that I really want to talk about. As it currently stands, this CA questions the nomination process. As you're seeing now with the Liberal process, the Liberal government already has who they want to anoint as their next leader, and that's Mark Carney. And anybody who stands in their way, well, sorry, or anybody they can't control, you're not welcome here. So when the CA questions the nomination process, they're right to do so. We see the current process as a deceptive illusion of choice, as the PCS can and have exercised heavy-handed control over the local nominee selection process. Leave me a comment. You think that he's right or wrong here? I think he's absolutely right. It was a heavy-handed process. They did take control. It is deceptive. They're trying to give people the illusion that they have a choice to vote for somebody who is going to represent them, when indeed that's not the case. They are pre-selected individuals only who you get to choose from. So the system is faulty, needs to be amended. UCP members are supposed to be the driving force behind the party. I kept hearing that time and time again. We were a grassroots members party, and that is indeed not the case. And I'm not the only one who's been disqualified, not before, and there's been others since. So it's this is just ongoing practice. If they don't like you, they don't want you, for whatever reason, as we know, it can be any reason. They don't even have to give you a reason. They'll just disqualify you. The UCP is not a private social club, but it is a private social club. And thus members deserve the right to more than simply bankroll the party that happily takes its money but does not respect its legitimate authority and right to select its own representatives. I was, and still am, a member of the UCP in good standing. And yet it seems that they're more than happy to take my money. I'm more than able to be a member, but for some reason, us members, I guess, are not eligible to run for leadership positions. So I love that. I'm good enough to be a member. They're good enough to take my money. I'm just not good enough. And most likely many of you who feel these same opinions and have been outspoken about them are not good enough to be leadership material within the government. It is not, nor should it be, within the scope of the provincial election committee to reject a nominee or candidate for expressing strongly held views and opinions. Now, I have never held back on my views and opinions. All of you who listen to this know that, and I never will. But I had already had a conversation with Danielle Smith before I took this nomination, and I knew there would be things that we would not agree on. I knew there were already things that we did not align on, net zero being one of them. But I also made it very clear that I understand that as the leader of the party, she would need to know, and I would need to respect where the party kind of would make its decisions. Not that I would compromise my principles or compromise my view, but I would give her a heads up if there was something that I was going to disagree on, especially publicly. And so that at least would allow her to prepare a response or to make mention of the fact that not everybody shares the same opinion. Okay. So again, I understand that when you work together, especially in a team environment, you have to have respect for one another. So this was never about, blatant disrespect for anyone. But I was going into government to call out the corruption, to find, to dig, which is what I thought Danielle Smith was doing. I thought we were going to downsize government, get spending under control, take control of the corruption in the Alberta Health Services. And as we're learning now more and more, it's ongoing. I have had people from within this UCP government tell me, Nadine, this is worse than under Jason Kenney. That statement alone should scare you. It's worse, not better, worse. It is not, nor should it be, within the scope of the PCS to reject a nominee. This is a direct violation, he says, of the UCP Statement of Principles. Now, I read the Statement of Principles from the UCP. And I was at a policy meeting one day, and I laughed because I said, can you go back to that statement of principles that you just had up there? They put it up for all to see. And I said, you know what? I said, how the heck did COVID ever happen? I said, when these are our principles. You know what they told me? Oh, they're just suggestions. I said, well, then don't call them principles, because principles are not suggestions. You don't compromise on your principles. And this is part of the problem. Everything that the members put forward that we are supposed to stand for, that this party is supposed to represent, is just a mere suggestion, and government basically can choose to completely ignore it at its own will. As a party, he says, we stand united on the following principles that guide our vision for a stronger Alberta: a robust civil society made up of free individuals, strong families, and voluntary associations, freedom of speech, worship and assembly without government or corporate censorship of mainstream or social media. He says here, in the case of Livingston McLeod, the strong opinions, and he even puts them in quotes, expressed by Miss Wellwood just so happen to align with the views of local Livingston McLeod UCP members, and most, if not all, were supported by facts, data, or logic during her interview process. It is exactly these opinions that should be deliberated and debated, not censored or disqualified based on another's difference of opinion. Wow. I was so pleased when I saw this. I'm not even supposed to have access to this letter, by the way. So you're privy to something now that not even I'm supposed to have. Um, Citizens to freely express themselves without fear of or reprisal, and that the party statement of principles be actively demonstrated, not mere suggestions written down on a piece of paper. Coming to the end here, the local CA and its members understand the importance of winning elections, but not at the expense of self-sacrifice of a strong nominee candidate in order to win favor of another riding. Reference here to Edmonton. Representation is at a local level. It is not appropriate, nor should it be expected, that Livingston McLeod or any other riding sacrifice its representation for fear of disapproval or in search of approval of another riding. Again, you share with me in the comments if you think otherwise, because representation is supposed to be representation of the people, for the people, by the people, right? I mean, we know that from the US Constitution. In Canada, we don't have that. They swear an oath to the crown. So in this particular case, the king. So we've got some things here that need to be addressed. Miss Wellwood has earned the right to be judged by her peers and local community members. I had the support of everybody in the community. I had an MLA that sat down. I was to be acclaimed. I'd put the work in. I did the work. Danielle Smith, even when I ran for the Senate, had given me her endorsement publicly. Why? Because I do the work. If I commit to doing something, I do it. I follow through, and I work hard. It is our opinion that the UCP board has failed to act in a democratic, just, and respectful manner, and it is time to amend policies to ensure this cannot happen again. We firmly believe that this decision for representation must be made by those who are being represented, the members at a local level. And he goes on to list a few other things here, but basically the UCP has violated the very principle for which it was asking the federal government to remain within its own lane, defend freedom of speech of Albertans. It's rather hypocritical of a Democratic Party which values freedom of speech to punish an individual who has respectfully exercised her right to freedom of speech and has openly expressed and demonstrated her willingness to defend, debate those views and opinions. So there you have it. That was my disqualification. And that's some of the responses at some of the local level where you've got some CA members and community members who submitted letters just noting their disapproval. But in light of everything that is going on today, Peter Guthrie, Sam Maresh, which is a big part of the sole source contracts, $500 million in sole source contracts. And Adriana Legrand should actually step aside until that investigation is complete. And a sole source contract for materials that literally we never even received. So, I've got, and I'll put it up here, there's been quotes here where over $5,000 a bottle for that Tylenol that we were supposed to get. We were supposed to get 5 million, which is more than what we have in population here in Alberta. We're just 4 point some million people. And she had ordered 5 million bottles. And I think we had less than like something like I think 9,000 that were so 13,700, I do recall, is the number bottles that we actually received and used. So, 5,000 some dollars for a bottle of Tylenol, that just absolutely insane, was sole sourced. And this is the person who's been at the center of the controversies around hockey tickets and airplanes and, box seats. And also, I learned today, as well as in Peter Guthrie's resignation letter, that there was a land deal for $300,000 more than what was purchased just 3 months prior. And again, same individuals involved. So, it's as much as we like to point the finger at the Liberals, there's more than enough corruption happening right here at home and within our own conservative establishments that need to be addressed, because it runs deep. So there it is. That is my disqualifications. First time I've spoken to it at that kind of length, and it is certainly the first time that I've shared this information. Love to hear your comments. What do you think? Was I rightly or wrongly disqualified? Again, if you're NDP Liberal, please spare me. I know where you stand on this. But conservatives, people who are truly conservative, do you believe that you have the right to choose your candidate? Do you believe that you have the right to have representation, that your views, your opinions are what matter in your riding, and that's what should be put forth? Some of the stuff, they just they call me out for saying false claims, but as you saw in the CA letter, in that local CA meeting, I qualified and quantified my statements and defended them. And we were able to have that discussion, that debate. Was I wrong to call for Shandro to go to jail after him sending a pastor to jail for 21 days? Well, I wasn't saying he had to go to jail forever. I was simply saying there needed to be accountability. So all of those things. Love to hear your comments. Please do share, like this video. I don't ask very often. But if you are able to donate to this channel, please do. I do a lot of this on my own time. It's not inexpensive to buy microphones and lighting and those types of things. And I don't ask probably nearly enough, because I know there are a tremendous number of people out there that are very supportive of what I do. And if you are able, I know times are tough, please, there's no obligation, just if you are able, and you can throw in a few dollars here and there each month, or, a one big donation, whatever it may be, please, hit the donate button. But please please do share this with people that, friends, family, people who may be of interest. We have some big problems and we need some solutions, real solutions. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for people like myself to get on the inside to actually find out what's going on. I would love to see a Doge right here, not only in Canada, but also in Alberta. Let's find out where every dollar is being spent. Let's find out where the corruption is. AHS, wow, that's one area I'd love to dig right into. Let's start deregulating. Let's start backing government out of business. Trump has literally made some really great decisions and is leading the way on so many good issues. Ignore the rhetoric, right? Ignore this, rhetoric and all the theatrics, and just take a look at some of his, MAGA, putting America first policies. And Alberta, we should be doing the same. So I'm going to leave it at that. God bless you all. Have a great day. And please do like, share, send me your comments.